before we get into any Rebel content, I did want to touch on this. And I wanted to touch on this because I I almost can't believe it. Like, there's an element in which centrism, yeah, all that bullshit, this is to be expected. But it's still kind of wild that Trudeau actually said this and said it in the way that he did and then doubled down on it. So this is our Prime Minister of Canada, who, again, I don't think it's the exact same as when Trump did the good people on both sides, but it comes pretty damn close to that. Okay, so we'll play a bit of it here.
And right now, where
Yeah.
around the world we see an increase of polarization, of extremism, of radicalization everywhere, including in some of the most open liberal democracies in the world. In our elections, in our public discourse, and in mainstream communications, let alone social media, we're seeing a rise in intolerance. We see the organizations of extremist groups on the far right and the far left that are pushing white supremacy, intolerance, radicalization, promoting hatred, fear, and mistrust across borders, but within borders as well.
So a lot of people jumped on the fact that he said you got left wing and then on the far left and on the far right, and then immediately talked about white supremacy. Now, a lot of people who are the liberal Twitter followers that Badrino interacts with immediately jumped on that and was like, he wasn't saying that the left was the one supporting white supremacy. It was just a list of things, and it was one of the things, and so it more applied to the far right here, or something along those lines, to try to like weasel their way out of it. I think that is a really I mean, even if you accept that, I still think it's a silly response. But let's just say, like, yes, that's true. The other element of it is like, what is he really saying here, right? Like, the left is not doing anything, like, not committing violence at all to the same degree as the far right. And notice how he doesn't even mention violence. What does he talk about? He talks about tolerance, and he talks about like radicalization. And it's like, okay, yeah, maybe some radicalization is good. Maybe we should be radically opposed to the fact that this asshole bought a pipeline. Maybe maybe it's good to I don't know, stand with radical indigenous activists that want to block pipelines. Like, maybe that's a good thing. And maybe that is a different thing than when radical fascists want to like protest hospitals for handing out vaccines, right? Maybe these two things are different and we should treat them different rather than lumping them together. The other thing is like tolerance. Like, yes, I am intolerant towards fascists. I'm sorry if that breaks your liberal heart. I'm not going to sit down and have a chit chat and a discussion with a fascist because they're a fucking fascist. And there's no point to do that other than to call them a fucking fascist and tell them to fuck off. So it's like, I hate this liberal tolerance shit. But it's like, it does boil down to in essence it is the same sort of move that Trump made of being like, oh, there's good people on both sides, or that the far left and the far right are somehow the same. There's a similar element in there, which is also because I think, what was it, the far left, or it wasn't alt left. I think, didn't Trump coin the alt left, where he was trying to say there's the alt right, but then there's the alt left, right? It's the similar like sort of dynamic here, and it's like, I don't know. Maybe we should be talking about whether or not a side is justified or not, morally speaking. But it's so much easier to speak in these like vague, banal statements of like, well, they're radical, and what we need instead of radicalization, what we need is radical, not left, not right, but forwardism. Which I love
The
that
thing
Andrew
is,
Yang has adopted as slogan. But yes, go on, Biana.
like, on the level of like, oh yes, this is stupid, it's like, yeah. The thing is, like, from the standpoint of capitalism and liberal democracy, this is true. He is absolutely correct. He is saying, like, oh, there is radicalization moving towards destabilization of the current ruling order. And to a liberal Democrat, to the kind of like capitalist system as it currently functions, both are at some level a threat. So it's like from that standpoint, he's absolutely right. It's just that like it doesn't matter from the standpoint of capital, from the standpoint of like liberalism, whether it is to make the world better or to make the world worse. That is completely irrelevant to a liberal because it is change, and that is what is dangerous. And like, what was the other thing? It is also just kind of like a completion of the like whole, oh, a vote for Jagmeet is a vote for
Conservatives.
Tool, or like, the liberals attacking on Twitter whenever somebody criticizes liberals because they're saying, oh, you're just trying to get Harper back or whatever other bullshit. Because that's all that they have is the threat of things changing and the fear that change will lead to a different world, regardless of whether it's better or worse. Either is a threat. Yeah. And so both have to be kind of like stamped out as much as possible, which means stamping at the left only. Like,
well, I mean, like it gets really weird because like, do you know the Eric O'Toole Twitter account? I'm sure, Bud Rhino, you're aware of this liberal account, but like, they followed me way back when they had like almost no followers, and I followed them back. So I was like, it's a mock account. This sounds fun, and fuck O'Toole, right? And then it was like,
yeah.
It's weird because a lot of these accounts follow us in part because of what we do against Rebel News, and they agree with us in terms of like attacking Rebel News, which is like cool. I'm glad we're at least allies in that fight. But then it gets like really super weird when this election happened, and a lot of them were getting like aggressive with me and some of my positions, and it's like my positions. I've never hid my positions. Like on Twitter, my podcast, all of it. Like it's been super fucking clear. But all of a sudden, it's like it matters now. It's an election, and you're going to attack the person who has spent most of my time online attacking the far right. And it was like it's more like it was convenient to them, but then it's like fuck you once you say any bad words about our daddy figure over here, which is really depressing. Yes, yeah. We're talking this recent one.
And it's the same thing with how the PPC operated this whole campaign, where the liberals did a somewhat like Pied Piper thing where they allowed like the same thing that like the Clinton campaign did with Trump in 2015 or whatever the fuck, when like it was kind of like, oh, let them kind of have free reign and in a lot of ways guide a lot of the conversations that are happening, and then present yourself as the only viable alternative to that horrible fucked up thing. And the liberals do that to both the conservatives and the PPC in order to kind of like be able to play off of them. Like they require that kind of like strong far right. Whereas like because the NDP basically offered nothing this election and there is no like actually left-wing alternative, they don't really have to give the same amount of shit about that. And because it's extra parliamentary, that means that they can clamp down on it a lot easier once they're back in power as well. Versus the far right, where they are organized through electoralism and whatever else. And so it is kind of a like, oh, we gotta let them be, or like, oh, you'll see the like pundits being like, oh, like the PPC deserves representation in parliament, even though they didn't win any seats and blah, 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 blah. And like all of these other sorts of things where they do have an interest in kind of appeasing the far right in order to play them up every election cycle, versus the left wing, where they're kind of like the goal for them is to stomp it out of existence so that they're the only viable alternative to the far right.
Yeah.
You can kind of see that to a huge extent in France as well, where you have like the centrists slash like realistically far right Macron, who is always presented and it basically is, in terms of presidential campaigns, the only alternative to
Marie Le Pen. And like yeah.
yeah, Le Pen, or it's looking like it might be like a kind of somewhat Trumpist figure possibly as well. The polls are
Fun.
looking kind of weird for their presidential election next year. But yeah, like in the previous election, it was Macron or, you know, oh God, what the fuck is their party name? They changed it recently. I think it's Rassemblement National or something.
I haven't been keeping on
But
top of
like,
the Parisian politics.
yeah, but you know, like there, because they have the runoff system as well, where like if no presidential candidate breaks 50%, then it goes on to runoff between the two most popular candidates. And so you just have a right winger versus an even further right winger. And the right winger gets to pretend that he's the progressive one, when in reality, he's just been trying to win the support of the far right this whole time.
Yeah. It's just weird, like I just don't understand what's in the mind of some liberal supporters that like to at least like I know that there's one thing to talk about the party themselves, right? Like the people in the party, such as Trudeau and like the leadership class and like their sort of strategic maneuvering. It's another just to talk about random liberal supporters and how like during the election they were super in support of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, for example, as they criticized rightly the people who threw rocks at Justin Trudeau
Yeah.
and the Canadian First assholes and how they were teaming up with the PPC. And then all of a sudden, Trudeau says this, and the Canadian Anti Hate Network puts out one tweet and they collectively shit their pants. And now all of a sudden, the Canadian
Yeah.
Anti Hate Network are like secret conservatives or something. When it's like, I don't know, maybe the issue is like, is that like you need a strong left to actually fight the far right because and his things we've been honest about it. I've been pretty supportive of well, it's not going to be Bill 63 anymore, but it was the one where they were trying to, or Bill, I can't even remember what bill it was, the one that was against the online hate anti-hate legislation that was happening. And I mean, it was critical support in that, like, I thought it was better than nothing. I thought it could have been better in many ways, but also it's like I at least thought it was decent because it wasn't crafted in such a way that I thought it could be used against the left. But like when you start uttering shit like this, that makes me a lot more worried to want to support something like that, you know? Because it's like I
Yeah.
don't
And the
trust
thing
you, you
is,
know. So
under Trudeau, you've had the two largest, like most deadly attacks of Islamophobia in North American history. We have had the largest shooting in Canadian history, all by far right assholes. Um, we've had just like these huge numbers of like killings and hate crimes and like, you know, prop killings and like missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, like just like this whole cycle of just like huge amounts of violence. And a lot of it has met, if not state approval, it's been state kind of shrugging their shoulders. Like, what has changed since the Quebec mosque shooting? What has changed since
they
the
did
killing of the Afzaal family?
they did a summit, so therefore it's they
Yeah.
did it.
Yeah, and then they called an election before like passing anything that might change anything.
Yeah, the
Um,
one bill that was
with the
actually targeting online hate, and
yeah,
they called an election before it even got through second reading. But it's the left that's the problem.
And
We need to crack down on the left, clearly.
and like there's still the kind of ongoing implications that the dude who did the killing in Nova Scotia, like the mass shooting last year, which again, totally not talked about anymore, may have had like RCMP funding or access to weapons or something similar. And then, just like it all just fucking continues and is met mostly with government inaction at best. Like,
Yep.
the invasion of Wet'suwet'en, the burning of the
I was gonna say
Mi'kmaq fisheries, like,
you look at most of the heavy-handed responses against these things. I've yet to see anti-mask protests, anti-vaccine protests be tear-gassed. Yet, when Black Lives Matter rallied in Montreal, they got tear-gassed, right? Like, where are these, like, the fascist groups getting the similar response that any left-wing organization has gotten in Canada? Whether it be Indigenous activists doing either rail blockades or blocking the pipeline in Wet'suwet'en, or what's happening in Fairy Creek right now, compared to like everything else that goes on in the country. I guess like the biggest scene or even when it comes to homeless evictions, when they have like 10,000 police show up for like 5 people, like the response is there compared to like a few horsebacked police officers to remove Adam Skelly. Like that was the most. Adam Skelly's barbecue was the like biggest police presence that I've seen at any of these anti-lockdown, anti-mask sort of like events. And again, it was just a light removal, a slight tap on the wrist, be like, "Be good, Adam. Please don't speak up too much." And the far left is far less successful at infiltrating politics. So far. I guess like the point, the main theme I wanted to get here with just playing this clip is like, I realize I don't see eye to eye with liberals, but if you want to call yourselves anti-fascists, like you should object to this because the liberal anti-fascists I know are only on Twitter. I never see them show up and actually stand in the way of fascist assholes. So do yourself a favor and realize that if you actually want to combat fascism, you need us. So you need to poo-poo this even if it's your daddy figure, okay? That's the least I can ask of you. The least. Otherwise, become leftist and shut the fuck up.
Hello, my rebels. Hello, my rebels. I'm a good boy. I'm a weirdo.